Good morning, welcome to class. I know a few folks were out last week, and we had a few visitors last week, so that was great. We got into this lesson about what about evil, pain, and suffering, and then we kind of got about 2/3 of it in last week. So I want to review it a little bit for the folks who weren't here, and then we'll finish that one out and move on. So we know that there is pain and suffering in this world. Sometimes it's extreme pain and suffering. People can lose loved ones. Questions are raised about why do bad things happen to good people. And we look and we see that God is all powerful. And it's like, well, why doesn't God, reach in and, save the person from the car wreck or whatever that question may be? Because we know that with God all things are possible, and we know that God is all powerful. But we also know that God has a plan. And we spent a lot of time on this last week. From the very start, God had a plan. And so what happens, there are natural laws, and so if you fall off a high place, okay, there's going to be consequences to that. There's going to be pain or death from that. These things happen. We also know, as you look at the handout on page 9, that God gave us a free will, and that's part of the plan. So God had a plan, and He told us there in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, and the Lord commanded the man, saying, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge and of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat of it you shall surely die." And then Joshua 24:15, we see where he talks about choosing who you're going to serve. We have a free choice, and that's part of the plan. We also know that Adam and Eve fell to sin, and that's consequences from that trickle through even till today. So that sin causes consequences, and we recognize that. And I'm kind of skipping down a little bit because of the review, but we also know that we can sin and it has consequences. So if someone goes out and gets drunk and then they drive their car and they wreck, it can kill or injure them or others. So there's consequences to sin, and that's our choice. God doesn't want us to make that choice, but He does allow us to make that choice. And again, part of the plan. The other good part of the plan we're getting around to, down at the bottom of the page, Romans 5:18, "Therefore as one trespasses led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men." So we know that we're all condemned because of Adam's sin. We fell away. But we also know that Jesus came to this earth, and that was the plan from the earth, and so we can be saved. So on page 10, modern sin affects us as well. Sin can be caused by natural laws, suffering and pain by natural laws. Also, some pain and suffering is good. If you touch the hot, I remember as a kid, the grill was going, and I touched the grill, and if you put your hand on it and didn't know, it could have caused some more severe damage. As you can tell, I was damaged as a kid. But all of this kind of works together to the plan, and not all of suffering can have a logical explanation. You can't always blame it on something. We tend to be in a world that wants to do that. It doesn't always necessarily, a lot of times doesn't have a short-term benefit, but we are here and we should be desiring a better place. So Hebrews 11:13 through 16, about a third of the way down the page, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they have been thinking of that land from which they have gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, They desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. So God has prepared for us a better place. We know that Jesus suffered, immensely for our salvation. We know that. Hebrews 2, 9 and 10. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. So it links their perfection, everything coming together, and suffering. Jesus suffered immensely on our behalf. Our time on earth is short, it's temporary. I heard the other day that people who aren't Christians, people who are like atheists, basically they want the earth to be as nice and pleasant as it can be, because this is what they got. And we're looking forward to a better place. This is where we are, and we should make the most of it and try to bring others to heaven with us, but this is not our home. Romans 8:18, for I consider that the sufferings of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. So yes, it acknowledges, suffering's real. The Bible acknowledges that, but it's not even worth comparing it with.
Yes.
All right. So as we finish out this part, we know that, we're tested. Sometimes it seems unbearable, but we do have a better place. James 1, chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So I didn't try to spend, I know we've had a whole weeks and weeks on grief and suffering and all of that, and there's a lot to that, and a lot of scripture that can help with that. But this was just meant to address the question of our critics who are going to say, well, if your God is all-powerful, why did he let this bad thing happen? And we need to understand that God doesn't worry so much about every little thing, that, good things happen to good people and bad people, and bad things happen to good people and bad people. So any comments before we move on?
That God sends his rain on the just and the unjust, I believe it says. So,
Yes.
yeah. He doesn't make it only rain on the good people's ground and bad, but
Right. And that reminds me of, I know down in Fulton, an interesting place, or South Fulton, they have a volunteer fire department, and you have to subscribe, and you pay an annual fee to be a member. And if you don't, your house catches on fire, they won't put it out. They'll come down there with their fire truck, and if the neighbor paid, they'll spray water on their grass so it doesn't burn up. So the rain only is on the, never mind, just. All right, so let's talk about scientific foreknowledge included in the Bible. We're going to talk about this some and then work through, and this probably will take a week or two to get through all of them. So the first one, there's things that are in the Bible that they didn't know scientifically back then, and maybe not for decades or centuries, many years later, before they figure it out. But we can look at it now in hindsight and go, look, this was telling a scientific truth that they either wouldn't have believed or didn't know back then. And so some of those, there's more in the book. Again, this is a book, Investigating Christian Evidences by Bert Thompson and Brad Harrop that I've been kind of getting a lot of this from. And this is, I picked a few to talk about. The first one is in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22, it tells us, "It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in." So back then, it was flat earth, okay? They thought the earth was flat, and if you sailed, you'd fall off the edge. Okay, and in fact, that was like till way later, before they got over flat earth. And there's still a few people that believe in flat earth, because they've never traveled very far, I guess. So the Hebrew word in Isaiah that's used for circle right there is K-H-U-G, Kug. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how I would pronounce it. And it literally means roundness or a sphere. So they translate it here, the circle, but it's basically saying in Hebrew that the earth is round, it's a sphere. And they thought it was flat. So later, of course, it was discovered the earth was round, that it was a big circle, and that this was right after all. Now, some of our critics would say, well, wait a minute, his statement that there's foreknowledge of science there, really this chapter is about God's sovereignty, and therefore, since that's what its main objective is, it doesn't teach scientific truths. And you're like, well, that wasn't its main objective, but it does teach that a scientific truth that was not known at that time. Whether or not that was its first purpose, it's just someone trying to criticize. I mean, they really just are picking at this as an argument. So Isaiah is making 2 points. You know, yes, the main objective is the sovereign nature of the God of the Jews. So he makes 2 points. God is a sovereign and the earth is a sphere. Isaiah couldn't have known either one when it comes down to it, but he was making points. It's like he's made these points that are proper and correct, and it was things that he was, you know, it was like God told him he was given this knowledge. So some folks try to blow it off because the Bible isn't a science book, so therefore you got to dismiss if it knows any science. And it's like, no, that's not true. But it's just a criticism you might hear at some point. So the next one comes from Psalm. Well, any comments on anyone here that's still like Flat Earth Society?
You would think you look up in the sky, you see a round moon and a round sun, and the stars look kind of round with a starboard, you know, up there. And then if you believed in flat earth, that'd be rectangle, I mean, you know?
Well, like Columbus, I believe, I remember reading that the roundness, because he could see the ships coming on the sea, and you'd just see the top of the mast, and it'd get bigger and bigger and bigger. And he said the only explanation is it has to be a curvature there.
Right. Yeah, that was what, 1400s?
Yeah, late 1400s, yeah.
So, you know, so 1400s, they'd kind of getting past it but back then it was like, no, it's flat.
I think we generally have a tendency to criticize things we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's part of the opponents of the biblical truths, you know, is they can't understand it, so, you know, criticize it so nobody else will believe it either.
Right. Good comments. So Psalms 19:5 and 6 raises a question about orbits. Psalm 19 verse 5. Which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. and it's talking about the sun, watching the sun go by. Its rising is from the ends of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Okay, so they look at this, and it's like the sun comes out, rising, rises in the east, and it, goes through the heavens, and it circles back, it has a circuit, and nothing is hidden from its heat. So they look at this, and back in time, you go far enough back, and they thought that the sun was orbiting around the earth. The concept of geocentricity. The sun revolved around the earth. And of course that was later discovered, no, the earth's revolving around the sun, and also that the earth's spinning too. And so when they first saw this, they would have thought, yeah, that's what it's doing. The sun's circling the earth. But then when they figured out that the earth was circling, then they're going, look, the Bible's wrong. Okay, because the sun is not orbiting, the earth is orbiting. And at that time, they felt the sun was stationary and the earth revolved around it. Okay, that's true on a basic sense, but the reality is they discovered in 1999 that the sun actually is orbiting the center of the Milky Way, and they measured for the first time in 1999, which is in our lifespan, it takes the sun 226 million years to make its orbit. And it's like, okay, that's a pretty long time. It's going 600,000 miles per hour, so it's trying its best to get around, but it's a long way. So the sun is in an orbit, if for those that want to dicker over the details of science. It is in an orbit, and also this revealed something way before its time, which is the sun is the source of all the energy for the earth. The solar radiation, it may be now we may burn coal, but that was from trees, forever ago that were died and compacted in the ground, and so the sun provides us energy on earth, and that was something that they didn't really think or know about at that point.
Well, like the religious leaders in Galileo, they made him renounce that of that time that the earth went around the sun. They just thought, well, the earth has to be the center.
Yeah.
He advocated the heliocentric, he said the other, but
Right.
for the around the earth being the center, but they said you've got to say differently. They threatened, I think, to excommunicate him or whatever if he didn't renounce the heliocentric principle.
Right.
And that was in the 1500s, so I believe. So even then, there were religious people that believed the earth was the center of the universe.
Yeah, in some ways it is, but it's not.
Yeah.
But it's not as far as
Orbit.
how things orbit. So the next topic to cover or think about is the speed of light. And God said, let there be lights. This is Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 through 16. Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let there be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. So we know that's talking about the sun in the day, the moon at night, and then the stars. So you have until the 17th century, it was believed that light was transmitted instantaneously. Okay, so they thought light, because it was, you flip the light switch or move the blind and the light's right there. It's right away. Sir Isaac Newton suggested that light is composed of small particles that travel in a straight line. Christian Huygens proposed the wave theory of light, and Olaus Romer measured the velocity of light and could see the delay of it as it traveled through space. So you're talking in 17th century, they figured out light moves and it has a speed. Okay, and that straight line speed is 186,000 miles per second, or 660 million miles per hour. So again, it's extremely fast, but it does take the light from the sun to get here takes 8 minutes. So it's, big distances, it takes a long time. So scientists use the speed of light to measure long distances, and they use the term light years. So this other star is so many light years away. So if it takes 8 minutes for the light from the sun to get here, it may take, a couple light years or many light years for it to come from some star, because it comes a long way. So they say our solar system is about 26,000 light years from edge to edge. So the light coming across takes 26,000 years to get here. And so some of the evolutionists deny the timeline in the Bible because, we're kind of the Earth's not been around that long. We're talking a few thousand years, not millions. And they're like, look, the light couldn't get here. It takes 26,000 years for it to just zip across the space. So therefore, the Bible's timeline is wrong. And of course, they overlook the fact that we just read here is that God created it with the stars already spread out. So he created an existing universe with stars in place, shining the light. I mean, it's amazing to me that they limit God so much. It's like, okay, well, God could create a star, but he would have had to have done it a long time ago because the light from that star's already coming here. And it's like, oh, he can create a star, but he can't create light on the way. Or he can create an earth, but he can't create a fossil record. He can't create adult animals and adult trees, but he could create seeds. It's just sort of an interesting how they tend to limit things. So they overlook the fact that it tells us here that God created the stars all over the expanse of space all at one time. Which is, it's amazing, but it's like, you either have faith or you don't.
Created in one day.
Yes. So the last one on this page, and I moved it around from, in the book it talks about the water cycle first, but it wouldn't fit on one page, so I switched them. So the depths of the sea, and y'all have probably heard before about the paths in the sea and the depths, and the paths being the currents, and we're familiar with that. And then the depths of the sea, Job 38:16, and Job was like the earliest of books, this is way back. Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? And it mentions two things here. Springs of the sea, and there are places, I know near in the southernmost tip of Maui in Hawaii, there is a spring in the ocean, and it's just fresh water. It's just a river comes out underneath the ocean. It's like, but the people that surf there and all and know this, that it's like, it's fresh water in that spot. And so if you surf, then you can get out over here and you're all cleaned off and you're not going to be sticky from salt water. And then we've been to a place in the British Virgin Islands that, again, you can tell the water is not salty. It's not what we call pure water because it's not that big of a flow rate, but it's just not salty like the rest. And it's harder to swim. You don't float as good. You can kind of tell different ways. So there are springs You know, water comes out underneath, it doesn't all have to come and flow in on an above-ground river. And we see springs on the land, and what makes you think there wouldn't be some under? But the other part of it was, that also talks about the recesses. And the Hebrew word for recesses or trenches refers to what is hidden and known only by investigation. So back then, they thought that, you know, the beach just kind of went off and it was shallow, sandy bottom, and it went off to the next place. And then it just